welcome to the inaugural episode of Argument Live. My name is Jeffrey Davis, and I'm going to be doing something a little bit different tonight on Twitch. So, in specific, I figured there's a lot of video games, there's a lot of folks who are just chatting, having fun. And I figured since I have a lot of an educational background and overwhelming ambition, I wanted to see if I could basically give not only a critical thinking course, but also a kind of open Q&A, sort of an ask a philosopher or anything. Thank you so much for the comments. The protocol for this one is going to be a little bit different. I'm really glad you guys like the intro. Mainly, what I'm going to be covering can be summed up as the following, and maybe you'll get a little bit more of a clearer idea on what the justification for this whole entire endeavor is. So, why this stream? What am I doing? Well, so Twitch is a public-facing forum that has an alarming amount of outreach, at least comparatively with the Academy. I can't tell you how many times I've had to deliver papers or ideas to empty rooms, and Twitch seems like a good place to, well, actually get them across. There's also a clear need, just generally, given the political landscape, given the areas of discussion on the internet, there's a clear need for developing critical thinking skills and critical thinking methods. So I want to at least provide a little guidance. I want to give you what I've learned, what I've experienced so far, and also discuss with you some of the more tricky, sticky parts of argumentation and of relating with other people. Plus, I just want to foster a community where people can actually discuss things and work things out together. Also, gamers need help. They desperately need help. And I figured Twitch is a good place to do it because they need so much help. Oh my God. So, when we're going to be thinking about this, I want to extend to you that this might seem at times like a college class. And for those of you who have been attending Zoom University for the last 15 weeks, I completely understand if you're like, oh my God, not again. Not again. You can't get me this time. And I'm going to see if I can't be a little bit more charming and a little bit more humorous and a little bit more open than, say, your Zoom classroom. Because, well, I teach on Zoom. Thank you, Yingyue. Sorry, excuse me. It is so good to see you. Thank you for the follow. And I figured, like, I hope it'll be more fun. But I also wanted to lay down a couple of different kinds of protocol as we move forward with these particular seminars, because I want to run them like a seminar, but I also want to run them like a conversation, which are generally just seminars, or what their seminars are supposed to be, generally. So what do I mean? What is this whole format protocol? So you can always text in the chat, obviously. I may not always be as quick on the bat like I am with I'm streaming Phasmophobia or streaming gaming or that kind of thing, mainly because I might sort of bracket your point and then bring it in when it might be necessary. Also, if you want to anonymize your questions or participate in some activities, you can always use the Mentee app. It's completely free to you. It's not free to me, but it's free to you. And there's a bunch of activities I have planned for this particular seminar. So if you want to ask questions, you can go there. I'll go ahead and post the instructions when we get to that part of it. Actually, I'll go ahead and flash this on the screen now. That way folks can at least see it. So all you'll do is you have two options. You can open up another browser window and just go to mentee.com and enter that code in. Or you can get the app on your tablet, on your phone, whatever device you like, and you can just scan that QR code and you'll automatically be in. So that way, if you want to do that, you can. If you don't want to do that, no pressure. Hey, it's all good. You know. So let's go back to the PowerPoint here. Let's see. There we go. So I also would like you to follow the chat ethics. So, don't be a jerk. Don't, operate in bad faith. Don't, if you make a mistake, own it. That kind of thing. We can go more about mistakes and repair as these seminars continue. But generally, what I try to do is foster a supportive and compassionate community such that, people can make mistakes and it's not the end of the world. So generally, there's going to be like 20 minutes of explanation, and then the rest of the time is going to be open Q&A. And when I say open Q&A, I really do mean open Q&A. Like, we are talking, of course we can talk about the material that I cover, but you can ask me about, whether or not sushi is actually a burrito. You can ask me about whether or not conversational implicature deserves to be canceled, or so on and so forth. You can ask me anything, and I'll do my best to answer you in a textured and scholarly way. So that's the general format guidelines. Pretty easy stuff, pretty straightforward. I also want to mention before I begin proper that I'm a little bit of a different educator. Which is to say, I'm not really about adversariality. I'm not really to make you feel bad about yourself or something like that. I mean, when someone's wrong, I'm going to point it out, of course, but I'm not here to be cruel, is the point. I'm here to be charitable. I'm here to help you. And I'm here to just be a sounding board. So all that is to say is that if you get something wrong, it's okay. We're going to keep moving. And I hope that you'll extend the same charity to me, because this is a live show right now. Normally I would have recordings. Normally I would have takes. Normally I would have everything, all the safety nets that comes with recording a video. None of that is here. So I'm going to stumble over my words. I might say the wrong thing. If I stumble over my words and say the wrong thing, or if I get a concept wrong, point it out to me. That's part of what argumentation is about. It's not just about punching your opponent in the face with words. It's also about helping each other come to understand and helping each other collaborate on different levels of projects, different stuff. So it's not, just a simple, we're here, we're going to be doing a variety of combat moves. Rather, it's going to be a little bit more coordinating, because the more that I go sort of get out in the world, and the more that I've, thought about my experience in bars and what have you, the more I've started to realize I don't know if people really know how to argue. And, maybe this can be a place to start. So we've covered quite a bit of my intro spiel, but I haven't really covered what the point of today's lecture will be, today's seminar. Well, the theme I have written down here is that this is basically summed up as the skill you have, the skill to hone. What do I mean by that? So you already have all the tools. You have a lot going for you. You're an incredibly observant person. You're an incredibly intelligent person. No, really. I know sometimes, academic classes can kind of convince you otherwise. You may have gotten some bad messages, but you know the challenges that you face, and you've navigated them up till now. That's pretty great. That takes intelligence, that takes determination, it takes acumen. So when we're thinking about, what tools do I need to critically think whatever that means, you already have them. You can think your way out of problems. You can choose between two or more different options and try to choose the best one. You can also relate with other people in certain ways. Yeah, that relation might not be perfect, and it might be pretty wordy, in fact. But at the same time, I think there's something to developing trust and developing relation with each other that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to automatically fail. I think that's the point I'm driving at here. I'm trying to basically comfort and outline here that no, you already have the tools. It's just a matter of honing them. You know what you need to do because you already do it. Now it's just a matter of perfecting them, elaborating on them. And that's just a matter of practice. And I think that's practice you can do. Seriously, I really do. So when we're thinking about critical thinking, don't think that you're like, oh, I'm too flaky to know critical thinking. You're not. You may have a different mode of critical thinking that other folks have struggled to recognize, but that doesn't mean you lack critical thinking. In fact, oftentimes it means that you're getting at something that other people are going to miss. But that's a future lecture. So one of the other things that I also want to point out is something that a lot of philosophy professors don't really want to talk about either. And that is just the phrase, critical thinking. Critical thinking as a phrase is up there to me like detail-oriented or prompt. Loves to work. It's one of those resume phrases that, much like your Microsoft Excel experience, it may not be everything we sell. Like, I don't know pivot tables, I'll be real. I theoretically know what they're supposed to do, but, do I put it on my resume anyway? Yeah. So, I see I have a quick question here. Would the app work better than online? It kind of depends. Both the browser and the app work pretty equally well. It just depends on what you're comfortable with. So yeah, don't worry about that. However, what I am going to do is I'm going to do the smart thing. And we are going to see about, this is where, there we go. I have toggled on Q&A. Hooray. So that way you can ask me a question anytime at all. There we are. See, this is the adventure of live teaching, right? So critical thinking risks being an empty phrase. It risks meaning absolutely nothing. It's like critical thinking, yes, everyone should have this. But what the hell does it actually refer to? What are we even talking about when we're talking about critical thinking? And to sort of answer or maybe provide the beginnings of an answer, we're going to go ahead and get out our handy dandy whiteboard here. Dun, dun. I'm also going to move myself over a little bit. There we go. Okay. So, when it comes to critical thinking, there's a couple of different ways that we can think about this. Hey, Megatris, thank you so much for the host. I appreciate it. So first, we want to say that it's not empty. It's not just puffery. Right? It's more than that. So typically, what critical thinking involves is evaluation, which just means figuring out the right or wrong way to do something. Yeah. So that's one aspect of critical thinking. Another one is method. This involves steps that one can rely on to get information. Or, you know what, let's amend that. To get or sort information. So there's evaluation, which is about figuring out the right or wrong way to do something. And then there's method, which are steps that you can rely on to get or sort information. Sorry about the handwriting there. It's very elvish. Or if you prefer, the inspiration for my handwriting is Elvish Presley. Anyway, jokes don't get better. The other thing about critical thinking that people tend to associate with it is getting at the truth. So this is a really gnarly thing. What does it mean to get at the truth? What does it mean to actually do something such that you are closer to the truth rather than farther away? And when I'm thinking about this kind of thing, I think there's a couple of temptations. So the first temptation is to say, critical thinking will always be the right move. And this may not always be the case. Critical thinking is often a very good move that we should do and we should do more of, and that's why I'm doing this whole series. But is it a universal tool that you should go out and bludgeon people with? You know, should critical thinking be like a sword that we use? Against, you know, someone who may not be as experienced? No. Critical thinking isn't just about tearing apart. And I think that leads us to the second temptation. And that critical thinking is always interested in destruction. So, both of these are not the case. And let me resize that way people can actually see. Hello, iPad. Okay. And this is the fun of live teaching. There we go. Bam. So, hey, how's it going? Yeah, right. Would you bring up Citizen Kane when your 4-year-old niece says MLP is the best movie ever? No, you wouldn't. Like, don't do that. Right? The background music's name. So this is from Harris Heller. And this is called Codename Indigo. I'll drop that in the chat. You can find it on Spotify. This is DMCA free music, so he specifically made it for that purpose. which is why I'm using it. That way I don't get DMCA'd. Haha. So, getting back to the point, critical thinking isn't always interested in destruction. It's often something that's more creative than destructive. It's just the way that we're typically taught it and the way that we typically practice it. Well, it usually results in people being, well, logic bros. What do I mean by logic bro? Well, you've met him, probably. Like, probably the best famous example of a logic bro is Ben Shapiro. You know, destroyed by facts and logic. You know, very much like a very pedantic, very unforgiving, very antagonistic interlocutor who seeks to deride as much as possible. Those are sort of logic bros. Here, I want to point out that critical thinking actually involves far more than the kind of deductive reasoning methods that we're taught. Oh, I'm sorry you had one of those today in class. I'm really sorry. Huh. So, yeah, there's a lot of folks who misunderstand what logic is, what critical thinking is, and it can be really, really disheartening. But there's hope. There's absolutely hope. Because if we start to understand critical thinking as getting at the truth, not in these sort of, it's always going to be the right thing to do and it's always interested in destruction, but rather, I'm going to get rid of these here. Get rid of our cloud strife there. But rather, if we think about it as illuminating and evaluating the rich life of our experience, critical thinking, in other words, can be thought of as a hunger to engage the world. So, obviously there's a lot packed in that phrase. It's not just about, you know, a kind of kumbaya, sort of like, oh, all I need to do is embrace the world and things like that. No, there's a lot to this. There's a lot of crunch. There's a lot of complexity. But I think we do critical thinking and ourselves a disservice if we don't think of it as a way of illumination and a way of evaluating what's before us. To let ourselves be hungry to engage the world. Feel free, yeah, Jess, feel free. So everyone, Jess, I have a couple educators in here right now, but Jess is my good friend and my good colleague. And feel free to steal any of this, and feel free to correct me. Like if I get something wrong, if I botch something, just let me know, and we can go from there. So what does that bring to us next? Now that we're a little clearer, hopefully, on critical thinking, what exactly are we supposed to do with this? What's the purpose? It's like, okay, so this is cool. Now what? Well, this is where we get to something called argument, and hence the name of this whole stream. Now, we're gonna go ahead and start our first activity, because I always like to ask my students this question, because I get a variety of answers. Like, they're not just the same answers every time. So, let's go ahead. If you want to log on and answer this, you can answer this in the chat if you want, but you can also answer this here. It's all good, Ange. It's all good. I'm one of those teachers who enjoys people coming in late because it actually helps me reframe it. Right now, we're going through, what do we associate with arguments? What do we think of? Good, good, good. Conflict, sea lioning, antagonism. Yeah, exhausted. It can be really exhausting. No, that's absolutely the case. Do we have any other ideas? What do we think? Needs validation. Yeah. Yeah, usually argument is about justification and validation. Right. Right. It can be about negativity. They can be very negative, right? And they can be about misunderstandings or miscommunication, gaslighting. Yeah. Reason. They can talk. Yeah, definitely. I mean, argument and reason, they kind of go with it. They can be about disagreement or antagonism. Coliseum combat. Okay. There we go. Do you like gladiator movies? Yeah. Yeah, these are all great. Persuasion, antagonism. Good. Well, I think we've gotten a lot of really good answers here, and I'm going to go ahead and dive into them a little bit. So, reconciliation and argument, I'm actually really glad that someone's already there. I think that's a really good way to think about argumentation, especially because, like, when we're thinking about argumentation, I do like gladiator. When we're thinking about argumentation, too often we can see it as antagonistic, right? And because most of the time it is. We think of, Jerry Springer show stuff. People throwing chairs, people yelling at each other. It's a whole thing. Or we think about bad online behaviors. We might think of sea lioning, which is the practice of insisting on goodwill norms and deploying them in bad faith such that you drown the other person out and falsely paint them as unreasonable. This is where you get a lot of the debate people, debate me, or I'm just trying to have a civil conversation. I can't believe you tried to do this, and then would use that to basically fill up the space. I have a whole thing on it. But it can also be about finding different ways through. It can be finding different ways to meet, not just in the middle, but different ways to work with each other. So it looks like you guys are actually pretty on the ball here, which I'm really happy to see. I'm very happy to see that. That we associate a lot of really positive things with argument. Okay. So, when we're thinking about what an argument is, I'm going to go ahead and write down some of your ideas here. So, what an argument is. And a lot of you focused on some big themes, right? Conflict, persuasion, negativity, validation, justification, and reason. Now, those are really broad, right? There's a lot going on there. But I think that we can start to tease apart what an argument might be. Because Ranker, you redeemed the ASMR voice, and so I had to say it in the ASMR voice. Rigor. Yeah, absolutely. So I think with argument, which is the primary thing that we're going to be looking at with critical thinking, but not just argument. There's a lot to argument. There's a lot involved in argument. So it's not just like, oh, we're going to be dealing with premises and conclusions and that is it. No, there's more than that. So when we're thinking about the zones of argument, if you will, the topology, if you want to get fancy with it, we have sort of the zone of critique. This is where you find stuff like conflict, adversariality, or just being adversarial. This is where you find, bad faith actions. Because remember, argument here, we're not just using this as a term of virtue. We're also using this in a kind of dispositionally neutral way. What are you talking about? Billy Mays here. Exactly. So when we're thinking about argument, we can talk about bad faith arguments. I think that still makes sense. We can talk about poor arguments. We can talk about mean arguments or cruel arguments. And sometimes in critique, this can get very, actually, you know what? I'm gonna change this. See, this is an important part, by the way, of critical thinking. To look at something twice, 4 times, 6 times, and be like, you know what? I'm gonna change this because I think this is gonna be clearer. So rather than having critique be the primary thing, let's go ahead and have adversariality. Here's the reason why I changed it. Critique isn't just about destroying things. It can be about creating things. In fact, you kind of have to be really creative to have a good critique. And I realized that when I wrote that down. I went, maybe I should change that. So what shall I change it to? And I looked at adversariality and I went, you know what? Conflict, negativity, bad faith actions, that's more about adversariality than not. Now, that isn't to say that all adversariality is bad. Sometimes there are things you want to be adversarial with. We'll get to the properly intolerable eventually. But for the most part, with the list that we're working with here, adversariality is going to have things like conflict, going to have things like negativity, going to have things like bad faith actions, going to have things like, actually, in some ways, persuasion. You do kind of need to, persuasion can be done coordinatively. In fact, I'm going to put that in the middle. There's a couple of middle categories here. There we go. And persuasion, and we have... Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm not going to say I'm the world's best lecturer or seminar or anything like that. I'm far from it. But I think this can be a way to sort of demo for a lot of my educator friends. That, we can use Twitch in varieties of ways. So I'm putting persuasion and rigor in kind of this middle spot. It's related to adversariality. Those two can be done adversarially. Ask any person who inhabits a marginalized identity in the university whether or not rigor can be adversarial. Spoiler, it can. A lot of the gatekeeping mechanisms are kind of gnarly, kind of racist, kind of sexist, kind of ableist. There's a whole story there, but we'll get to that. But at the same time, rigor and persuasion, sometimes it's good to double check your work. I just demonstrated rigor by putting adversariality right there. And sometimes it's good to persuade people. You can do that in a coordinating way. And so this is where we get our other category, coordination. This is where we have things like building. This is where we have things like validation. In some ways, this is where we get justification. So when we're thinking about argumentation and critical thinking, or what an argument is, and these sorts of zones that we associate with argument, the big thing I want to point out is that arguments don't have to be screaming matches. They don't all have to be, mean old Mr. Guy here. They can also be like very useful. My drawing ability, by the way, is not look, I'm carrying a very fine teaching oh my god, that mouth is terrifying. A very fine teaching tradition onward. I am not a great drawer. Here we go. So here we have, here's Jerry Springer. Here's adversariality. And here's coordination, where you learn a new idea. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Skillsy. Argument is not equal to fight. There are ways in which we can reason together, the way we can illuminate together in the world without resorting to just being like, rah, 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 rah. Now, all that, I want to put a big caveat here. Is this what's called quietism, which is the viewpoint that, well, the best way is always the most moderate way. The best way is always the way in which, we're just very calm and rational. We have no emotions at all. No. There are things we should reject. Nazis are a good example. We should reject Nazis. Nazis are bad. They're properly intolerable. And so, can we yell at Nazis when they're Naziing our street up? Yeah, go for it. I don't think that's an uncontroversial statement. Maybe there's an analytic philosopher out, in Oxford who's just like, no, you're not behaving as if you are absolutely in the space of ideal reasons. I don't know why he's simultaneously Peter O'Toole and Alan Rickman, but here's where we are. But I think we can have the properly intolerable, and we can reject things without having to worry about it. Yeah, I would agree with that, Ange. Punching Nazis is good for the community. So, this brings us to our first formal definition. This is probably one you've heard. So, argument refers to an assertion or series of assertions that make a point / draw a conclusion. In other words, the words, when put all together, make the world more recognizable in certain ways. Notice I'm saying recognizable, not true. That's important. So, why am I saying recognizable and not true? Because there are arguments that they're successful, they have great pragmatic effect, and they allow people to recognize things in the world. In fact, that's the great trick, right, of argument, where it's sort of like a spell, where you can't help but see this argument everywhere. Does that mean it's true? Depends. I mean, there are certain justification methods that would claim that, well, that is true. Where we now can recognize truth in the world. But I don't, again, just want to limit argument to a term of virtue, because it's not. something being an argument. Yeah, of course, no problem about that. So, something being an argument isn't just a matter of being great. Sometimes, and here's a good example of it, sometimes when we're thinking about argumentation, we hear bad arguments that persuade us and change the way that we look at things. So QAnon is a really good example of this. Any conspiracy theory that really spreads like wildfire. There's arguments there. They're not good ones. They're bad ones, to be sure. But they're arguments. And because they're successful, not true, but they're successful in achieving a pragmatic effect, it means that the world is more recognizable in certain ways. And it's a big reason why we have such a huge polarization problem. It's not just a matter of like, oh, echo chamber this, echo chamber that. It's that the arguments that are circulating around that we're not inoculated against, that we're not somehow able to resist, that appeal to the ignorances within and without. They can cause a lot of damage. Birds work for the bourgeois. Birds are fake. The chat is wonderful, as always. Okay. So, argument is just an assertion or a series of assertions that make a point or draw a conclusion. When they put them all together, it can make the world more recognizable in certain ways. Maybe for the good, maybe for the not so good. Depends on how pragmatically successful it is. Now, I can hear some of my committee groaning at me, so I'm gonna throw them a bone. I actually love my committee; they're wonderful. So, argument isn't just about pragmatic success. It's supposed to be about what's called epistemic success. So all that means is it successfully constitutes knowledge. Whatever that means. Another way to boil that down, it's actually effing true. And there's a couple of different ways that we can go about figuring out if an argument is actually effing true. And those are two terms that get thrown around a lot. One you've probably heard. The other one you've also probably heard. So you've probably heard both. So when we're thinking about validity and soundness, here's an easy way to sort of break it down. How do we look at this? And this is part of what we'll be getting into the nitty-gritty of over the next couple of weeks and what have you. So, validity, for an argument to be valid, all it means is that the structure of the argument is well built. That's it. It's a well-built argument. The parts fit together really well. Here's an example. So here's premise one. A premise is just a reason. All birds are fake. All fake things are purple. Therefore, that's what those dots mean. All birds are purple. That's a classic syllogism. Very frequently, people don't really use syllogisms. In fact, logic bros use them a lot, and I get confused by that because I'm like, don't use the syllogism. Like, it's a pedagogical tool. What are you doing? I mean, I suppose like there are certain syllogisms you can use to talk about macro level like knowledge stuff, but I don't know about that. So yeah, this here, I should probably be careful here. All birds are fake things. All fake things are purple. Therefore, all birds are purple. That would be a valid argument. There's nothing wrong with the structure. There's nothing wrong with the way that it's built. It works. Except, of course, it's completely false. So this is something that a lot of folks miss about validity. It's just a structural evaluation. The way that it's usually explained in logic classes, which I sometimes think works and sometimes, sometimes like, I'll actually get to that. That's a great question, Jess. I'm gonna get to that. Validity doesn't automatically mean true, I think is what I'm trying to say. Validity is about, well, did you follow the rules of syntax? Did you follow the rules of grammar? Does the conclusion follow from the premises? But the thing is, if you say that to an everyday person, does the conclusion follow from the premises? They're just going to look at you and be like, what? When really what a lot of everyday people need to hear is not, does the conclusion follow from the premises? But instead, let's pretend, all birds are fake and all fake things are purple. Does that mean all birds are purple? Does that work? And usually people are like, well, let me think about it. If all birds are fake and all fake things are purple, then yeah, I guess, because they're fake. And that's a little bit more what we're talking about with validity. Soundness, on the other hand, that's just like, it's true in the world. It's like actually there. Like birds are actually fake. And that's where soundness is mainly the purview of empirical studies. So like sociology, science, things like that. The social sciences, the hard sciences, et cetera, et cetera. This is where we don't want to get rid of science. We don't. We need to be careful about how the way we do science, but that's better for a philosopher of science to tell you about. Here, well, soundness just means it's true in the world. Welcome, Andre. Welcome to the world's weirdest critical thinking class. All birds are fake. It's a syllogistic example is the idea. So Jess, you had a question here. It's a really good one. How does an argument go beyond making a point? Or can it? This is really good. This is really, really, really good. Because when I'm thinking about argument, there's a couple of different things that I could think about here, right? So, I could think about chess moves. I could think about collaboration. Hell, I can even think about like looking towards the future and being a live, laugh, love poster overseeing the sea. Actually, that does kind of look comfy. But does argument actually go beyond making a point? I'm gonna ruminate on that. I'm gonna come back to it. I'm gonna circle back to it. Don't let me forget it, because I think we could tease that apart. All right. So, we have a question. Oh God, is purple fake? If we assume, according to the premises that we were given, that all fake things are purple, does it automatically follow that all purple things are fake. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It just means that if you're a fake thing, you're going to be purple. But there may be purple that isn't necessarily fake in this bizarre thought experiment. But that just kind of depends. I'm going to say that's answered. Okay. Thank you for the question. We're going to move on to the next activity. So, given that argument is all about these particular features, you have reasons interlocking together to make a point or to draw a conclusion, and they help you recognize the world in certain ways. Well, what's the last argument you noticed online? What kind of things, like this can be a comment section, this could be a Twitter post, it could be something you saw on Reddit. It could be anything, really. And to get some motivation here. Good. Tangerine Terror got 400 e-votes. Yeah. Good. Good. That is a part of an argument. Yeah. Oh, if you want to be a good father of 2 daughters, respect and love your wife. Good. That's a really good one-sentence argument. I'm gonna write that one down because I think that's a really good example. So if you want to be a good father, respect and love your wife. And of course, the Epstein-Biden thing. Yeah. Whether to use the scientific name or not as the common name can be offensive. Ooh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Masks don't work, and here's QAnon's reasons why. Prove me wrong, but not with science. Yeah, good. Yeah, no, those are good examples. Prove me wrong. No, not like that. We'll also get to that. Good. How Cyberpunk 2077 sold a promise and rigged the system. Very good. That is absolutely an argument. Sometimes headlines can be arguments. Okay. A lot of anti-LGBTQ couples being able to claim their children on both their parents. Oh. Cyberpunk 2077. Oh my god. Great. I get you. Yeah. Okay. So, when we look at these arguments, whether or not they're specious, whether or not they're, good or bad. I knew something was up when Biden was T-posing naked on Harley in Delaware. Thank you for the wonderfully evocative image. A lot of articles saying LGBT should be allowed to. Yeah, they're making a comeback. Ooh. Interesting. Okay. Good. I'm getting a lot of good arguments in the chat here. And by good, I mean good examples. So, how do we tell? How do we go about the business of evaluating these claims? Do we just have to accept them? No, of course not. But what do we do in order to evaluate all of this stuff? Well, there's a couple of different places we can look. So first, there's evidence. I forgot a drink, Skillsy. I can't hydrate. I'm stuck. It's okay. I will hydrate soon. I will pretend to hydrate. So evidence, which is a whole big thing. We can go into just a topics class on evidence. We can talk about structure. This is validity, right? You know, whether or not the claims are even well formed, if they work together in the way that the person thinks they do. So for instance, if I really wanted to prove that birds were fake,
recompense.
Thank you. Got a beverage. So when it comes to the claims fitting together, I wouldn't necessarily say all birds are fake, therefore I have clearance to the Pentagon, or vice versa even. I have clearance to the Pentagon, therefore all birds are fake. That doesn't follow. That doesn't connect together. There's an inferential leap there that I can't cross. I'm not Neo from the Matrix with logic like that. No. I can't just jump up. I'm beating the metaphor to death. COVID vaccine causes Bell's palsy? But okay. Another part of evaluating these claims has to do with authority. But this can also be cashed out as credibility. How credible? Right. The sort of black swan thing. And a lot of the black swan. So for those of you who are unaware, it was a long time, the black swan sort of an example of, like, for a long time there was thought that there are no black swans in the world. There's like none black swans in the world. And it turned out that actually, no, there are black swans in the world. And it became sort of this analogy. What was his name? Nassim Taleb, who kind of uses it to talk about externalities and that, in that kind of sense. Verification, yeah, we can talk about verification. That can be involved. So here, this is ways to check up on the evidence and structure and the authority. Like, that's how we figure it out. Verification also can get us into trouble in certain ways. Right, I've never seen one, so they don't exist, that kind of thing. But they do exist. They're just kind of rare. Melanistic swans. So verification can get, like, all of these things can be really useful, but none of them together are going to provide a bulletproof thing. You know, mainly because part of responsible critical thinking means keeping a certain level of humility. But it has to be appropriate to the challenge. Let me rewrite that word because it's just like, nope, I'm gonna fly off the page. Good. So why do I say humility is going to be necessary and is on the same level as, like, things like credibility and verification and evidence? Because very frequently we can get caught in these sorts of traps in our critical thinking, where we end up only accepting one kind of evidence, just one, or we end up only accepting one kind of structure, or one kind of credibility or one kind of verification method. And the world is just filled with far more evidentiary types, far more argumentative structures, far more credibility structures, far more verification methods than, well, we typically expect. Here's an example. Let's say, I actually knew someone like this back in West Michigan. Let's say I'm only going to trust what I see with my eyes. This person took it to the extreme because it meant that this person did not believe in any electromagnetic spectrum color beyond the visible spectrum. Like, did not believe it. Could not believe it. Why? Because the person couldn't see it. Now, that's a form of evidentialism. It's setting an evidential threshold, and it's basically saying, I will only accept things within this evidential threshold, and everything else is bullshit. However, you can probably see the problem here. Right. A geographer, right? Tectonic plate. Oh man, the story of how tectonic plates, that whole story is a fascinating one. Like, look that up. Yeah, magenta is therefore fake. Exactly. So it's important to be humble about what we select. Did this person ever get an X-ray? I don't think so, actually. I think they distrusted doctors. He was very skeptical of medical care. So, but yeah, when we're talking about evidential thresholds, we should make sure that those particular evidential thresholds are appropriate. Right, I can't see my skeleton, therefore it doesn't exist. It's all cocaine and ghosts in there. Right. Yep. So, but evidence thresholds change. I mean, this is part of the issue with epistemology, and we're going to dive into that in a more deep dive here. I'm just sort of giving you a broad overview of the kinds of things we're going to be talking about in the future coming weeks. Yeah, ghosts in the blood. It's going to be fun. But yeah, evidential thresholds change. I don't need to, do a huge, comprehensive, peer-reviewed, blinded study on my cats getting into a fight in the dining room because I just heard them getting into a fight. And now my iPad is giving away my business here. There we go. Yeah, demonetized. Exactly. So, likewise with structure. So, contrary to what a lot of Western logicians want to say, there are other logical structures, like the Jnana school. Like, there's a whole school of Indian logic from India that is just it's really developed, is really awesome, and there's a lot of different syllogistic methods that we just don't have in English, but we have in Hindi and Sanskrit. So it's like really nifty. But of course, if we select that out of the story, saying no, the only general logical structure is the mathematical one in Anglo-centric universities, that seems pretty shady. You need to be humble. Being like, well, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I don't know what the universal standard is. Likewise with credibility. I often find people, and perhaps this happens more to me than others, like where people see me and they're like, oh my God, what is this person rambling on about? And then eventually, through some magic that I don't actually understand, people tend to find me like barely like just this much more credible, and I'm very thankful for it because I'm like, yay, I have credibility. But credibility requires us to be humble about who we accept and who we don't accept, because a lot of times stereotypes and controlling images and things like that can get in the way of credibility. We'll talk about controlling images and critical thinking again in the future. And then finally, verification. There's a really annoying philosophy thing here. Like a really annoying one that I'm going to kind of mention and then run away from it. And I can already hear the eyes rolling. What's the grounding of ground? Yeah. So what that means is with verification, it's important to check up on your work. But the annoying philosophy question is, how do we know that the method that we're using to check up ultimately gives us truth and is ultimately foolproof? Like this is where the grounding of ground problem. And like a lot of folks are like, well, no, look at science. It's the fact, it's the case. And then you have people like Feyerabend who are like, by the way, non-realism is a thing. And then everyone goes, oh my God, what is happening? Like literally that. So it's important to be humble about the verification methods. And sometimes our verification methods are just wrong. We think we verified it. Nah. Sorry, bro, you didn't. You didn't actually verify it. So humility, I think, should be kept as a foundational evaluation mechanism for figuring out whether or not these arguments are actually true. I have rambled on a lot. I didn't mean to ramble on this much. Okay. Was there anything else I wanted to really... A whole bunch of things I wanted to cover. What I'm going to do, though, since I've been yammering at all of you and you've been all so patient about it, is I'm just going to open the Q&A. Oh, helps if you actually like... There we go. All right, Q&A is open. And we're going to change things up. All right. And we're also going to bring me in here. Here I am. Ta-da. Kind of shrink me down there. There we go. Okay. Do you have any questions about anything that we've talked about? Otherwise, I can just go back to Jess's question. How are we feeling? Okay, let's see Jess's. All right. Okay. So the question that Jess came up with is, let me capture it here. Okay. So I'm going to get to that question in just a minute too, because that's a great question. So here we have Just for Real's question. How does an argument go beyond making a point? Or can it? So when it comes to an argument making a point, that is this primary mode. But how does it go beyond it? Well, I think the first thing I would ask in response to that is, what do we mean by going beyond it? If going beyond it means establishing a community, I think arguments can do that. I think arguments can indeed establish knowledge community. They can establish things like traditions. So when it comes to thinking about just making a point, I would probably say that I had seem to have lost the... Oh, okay. It's fine. I would probably say that beyond making a community, it could also potentially make a way of seeing the world that can be inherited. And what do I mean by that? So, one of the things that we can think about when we're thinking about how knowledge distribution works is narratives. We think about the narratives we inherit. Maybe they're just family stories. We think about the narratives that we're surrounded by, the social narratives that we constantly have to navigate. I think arguments, when they become calcified or accepted within institutional norms and history, and their arguers are elided or erased, that they have the appearance of taking on a natural fact. And that this natural fact then creates a state of affairs of a frame of understanding. And this frame of understanding ends up getting reproduced and inherited and that kind of thing. I mean, I'm hesitant about that. I mean, yeah, a priori arguments could create knowledge in certain respects, but it depends on what we mean by knowledge. And like that, I would probably say that a priori arguments can produce certainties under particular conditions, but whether or not those certainties translate to knowledge, I don't know if I'm willing to make that. That is my attempt to answer that question, Jess, but you can go ahead and ask it again and I can take another crack at it. I'm going to move on to this question though. I'm seeing otherwise reasonable friends posting low-level Q propaganda. How can I bring them back to reality? Oh, I should probably explain a priori too. Real quick, then I'll answer this question. Yeah, loosely possible. So a priori, so there's two kinds of, in philosophy, there's two kinds of ways of knowing. There's a priori and a posteriori. And a posteriori isn't just about the thickness. It's also about, bad joke, terrible joke. A priori is before experience, literally prior to the world, prior to experience. So an example of a priori contradiction would be a four-sided triangle. Something like that. That's like the classic example. You're welcome, Chuckus. So, and a posteriori knowledge, that's knowledge we get by looking out in the world, looking out and experience that. So after experience, we reflect on what's happening. Those are sort of the classic distinctions. And you can also think of it as like internalism versus externalism. You can do that if you want. I suppose there might be some problems with that too. Are there externalist a priori people? Probably. So yeah, a priori just means prior to experience. And a posteriori is its opposite, post-experience. Okay. So I see otherwise reasonable friends posting low-level Q propaganda. How can I bring them back to reality? So there's a lot of conflicting things when you read articles about dragging people back from the brink of conspiracy theory, especially really virulent ones. And some of them are useful. Most of them aren't. And what I would say is that you kind of have to go by the reformed white supremacist playbook here. There has to be a substantial portion of that person's recognition that basically engages with the idea that, oh wait, this is propaganda, it's not the truth. But getting them to that place can take a lot of time and a lot of trust and a lot of patience. And it's 2020, we don't all have that energy. So probably one of the things, I'm not going to say it's a hopeless thing. But I also don't want to mislead you on how difficult this job is. So I'll give you an example. I have one of my very best friends in the world had some very standard dude bro ideas about women when we were adolescents. And when you can go ahead and do that, Alex. When he encountered a particular case in the news, specifically the killings in California, he had a wake-up call. He had a kind of epiphany going, oh my God, that's me. That could have been me. And he reached out to me. And we had a great conversation about it. And ever since, his viewpoint has changed for the better. He's far more responsible. He's far less misogynist. And he's just a great person. So when we're thinking about recovering people from Q propaganda, it's going to be, it's not useful to say, oh, it's different for every person. I think the thing that I would push for is look for what they respond to. What are venues that they respond to? What are evidence sources they respond to? What kinds of presentations are they most responsive to? Where can they see themselves? And I've found that to be one of the few things that brings people back from that kind of thing. But it's tricky territory. And I think that's a good subject for a more deep dive later on. How to recover from things like QAnon, from things like white supremacist organizations. If recovery is possible. I want to say it is. For some, but it's a hard road. It's a hard road. And if you want more of an answer, if you want specific strategy, because I don't know, obviously I don't know you, because this is anonymized, and I don't know the person we're talking about. But if you want to reach out and we can form a specific strategy, that can also happen too. Okay. Have I ever encountered an argument that's sound but not valid? No. No, that's actually not possible. At least definitionally. So when it comes to soundness, a necessary condition of soundness is validity. Something can't be sound, at least according to deductive reasoning. And then this is where it gets tricky. According to deductive reasoning, you can't be sound without being valid. Now, here's where it gets weird. If we were to substitute the word sound for true, like just not big T truth, but small T truth, I would say that have I encountered an argument that's true, but not formed very well? All the time. All the time. That's a much more common thing. But as far as like the strict definitions of sound but not valid, no. It's not definitionally possible by the boundaries of those terms. Does that mean that, Right. I have a lot of malformed arguments. A lot of tonight's presentation has been malformed arguments on my part. We're not going to get it perfect. But that's where the relational part of arguing is quite so key. Andre has a tale here, and I'm going to take a look at it. Okay. Had a discussion with a family friend who used to babysit me, QAnon, posting QAnon BS, and they were telling me that, like Kamala said, the military are soulless bastards. Look it up. I was listening to satire, showed it to her, and that's a super liberal site. Check Snopes. She still didn't accept that, though. Interesting. Okay. Oh, thank you, Skeelzy. So when it comes to things like that, one big factor is the necessity to save face. This is where Irving Goffman can be kind of useful. Like that right there is, I've encountered cognitive dissonance and I have to reject it because otherwise I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong about this thing, then my entire house of cards cognition and argument that I'm using to support my life can possibly fall down. Now that sounds really mean. I actually don't mean it to be mean. I mean it to be in the sense of, there is something that's not being talked about. There is something that is desperately trying to be avoided at looking at. Some mistake, some decision, some state of affairs, something. And it just has to, finding that thread can be tricky. And also finding that thread may not be your job. I struggle with that, right? Like it's a big reason why I'm so awkward and shy when it comes to new people. I see too much and I'm like, oh, and I start doing the robot in place. So yeah, and I would say in that case, it sounds like there's a core that can't be looked at right now, but nevertheless is present. And it has elevated the stakes such that, being wrong about the liberals means something else is true, and she can't have that to be that true. She also tried to guilt trip me by saying I was being mean to her because her health was bad. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a common rhetorical move. So the idea here is that because the face-saving maneuver didn't work, right. So we'll get to the reinforcement thing. Thank you, Tori. So when the face-saving move doesn't work, we go for the next big legibility, which is to say, I'm going to harness some physical truth about myself in order to rhetorically bludgeon you with it, which is really crappy from many perspectives. Like the disability studies perspective, like we get really, really irritated about that particular one. So I would say that's acting in bad faith, and we can also talk about what bad faith means. It's not just a matter of like, oh, you're being mean. No, bad faith usually involves a level of deception. It involves a level either of self-deception, of intentional deception, or both. And when you're acting in bad faith, the reasons that you're offering are not the actual reasons you're doing something. You're just trying to secure an outcome. So that might also be the thing. But speaking to what Tori said in the chat, studies have shown that providing information that disproves a deeply, sincerely held belief, even if it's just proving the belief to be false, will cause the person to actually strengthen the belief. Yeah. There's a kind of antagonism, and that's why one of the reasons I want to approach critical thinking the way I do. It's not just argument one, Kano, and argument two, Sonya Blade, fighting in Mortal Kombat. It's there's a lot more dimensions to it. And one of those dimensions is relation. You have to have the right relation in order to have the right trust, in order for your point, in order for that opportunity to actually work. So the reason, I'll use my friend again, the reason why that friend talked to me and I was able to help him through figuring out a lot of these sort of indoctrinated misogynist beliefs is, well, we trusted each other. We had the right kind of relation. Other people had literally said like similar things to him that I said. But because I said it at that time in that environment, the particular words that I chose under that particular context, all of that meant that it was effective. But if you just pay attention to one of those variables, just one, nope, ain't working. It ain't working. It's a holistic exercise argument, which is what makes it quite so exhausting. But it also means that there's a lot of opportunity for coordination and teamwork and community building that otherwise gets missed. All right. I don't know if I've actually answered any questions or if I've done the philosopher thing and just talked around questions. We have a bad habit of doing that. We do. We do. And if you have further follow-ups or, if you want to be like, you know what, though, like that wasn't a great answer. Give me a better answer. I can try again. That's what I'm here for. Hold me accountable. I'm learning here just as you are. Yeah. To quote a despicable man, fuck it, I'm doing it live. Demonetized. And if folks are also have no more questions. Oh, here we go. Okay. The hashtag save our children. Good. Okay. So another motivational thing that happens, especially in QAnon and conspiracy theories in general, is I've always detected a deep anxiety about being made a sucker. Like, for some reason they've been persuaded. For some reason they've bought into it, and they see the resistance and they see the ways that they could be wrong, but they don't want to actually appear like a sucker and instead want to rely on sanctimonious, very emotionally charged with certain values, preloaded, like save our children, that kind of thing. It provides a kind of value bulwark, which can be really disingenuous. So like the idea here is that they buy into the QAnon conspiracy through the Save Our Children tag. And they're like, okay, I got this. And then they see like, oh, QAnon is actually disreputable. But then they look at, they go back to the Save Our Children tag and go, well, wait a minute. I'm not a pedophile. I believe in saving children from pedophiles. Yeah, they don't even realize it's tied to Q at all most of the time. They just want to go save the children. They let the values do the work. And I think maybe like in a really roundabout way, what I've been trying to say in this introduction, this long-winded, chaotic introduction, is this. We can't rely on these ideal palaces of perfect thought to get us through arguments, to get us through our lives. We can't. Wittgenstein once famously said, we have to return to the rough ground, and I'm very much in agreement with that. We have to go back to the mess, which means we don't just look at deductive reasoning, which means we don't just look at empirical inductive reasoning. We look at abductive reasoning. We look at relational reasoning. We look at the ways in which we convince each other and critique each other. Now, to save our children, it's not really connected with reality because it's just harnessing a value set that's been with us since the Satanic Panic and beyond. Our children are under threat by a hostile force that is secret So, how do you fight that? Well, you prove it to them over a long period of time that, well, the children aren't in danger. And that may require a variety of evidences. It may require actually critiquing the place where they're getting their evidence. It may require risky moves, like saying, well, you're getting your news from InfoWars. What makes you think that Alex Jones is right? And they'll give you some reasons. They may even be the reasons they believe. Probably not. But the important part is that you dig. If it's appropriate for you to. If you're in that right relation. If you're not in that right relation, probably don't dig. Probably cut your ties. Right. Right. Now QAnon, there's a whole thing about that. And there, in addition to that kind of thing about QAnon, it's the actual story of how that got started is missing. So that might be another way to sort of approach it. I found that when I tell people that, hey, how's it going? When I tell people the actual story about, yeah, the Reply All episode is good. Did they actually cover the World Corp Enterprises angle? Because I don't remember if they did or not. Because if they covered the World Corp Enterprises angle, then yeah, I would recommend it. If they didn't, that needs to be taken into effect. Because that part of the story is far more important for the sort of virulence and the radicalization of QAnon. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, it's tied to World Corp. If you look at Nexpo's video, Skillsy, I mean, QAnon Pizzagate, which is where QAnon blew up. Like that was sort of the germination, the proto QAnon. Pizzagate was because of World Corp. I should probably explain what the heck I'm talking about in a very, very glossy way. Yep. Okay. So, and I will get to your weirder war. I will get to you. I just want to explain this real quick. So there are these things called alternate reality games. If you've way back in the day, Halo 2 had one called I Love Bees. Trent Reznor's Year Zero album had one. And they're basically like the midway point between like LARPing and tabletop RPG. Like you don't make a character, but you go out and you find clues and there's a mystery and it's actually a game, but it appears real and there's a lot of weird verisimilitude and ambiguity. Yeah, like Frog Fractions. And yeah, Ben Drowned. That's a good one. Yeah. And there was this supposed ARG from this vaporwave band called World Corp Enterprises. And they were, people were like, oh, this is kind of weird. And it turns out that they were actually connected to, supposedly, this extremely powerful, very disturbing ring of dark web stuff. And by dark web stuff, I mean like pedophile stuff. And they would like post videos on their YouTube account that would have just the sound from some of them, and it was really disturbing. And a lot of the 4chan people at the time were really disturbed by that and went down the rabbit hole trying to find what is up with this World Corp Enterprises, because they were told in what they believed to be an ARG that, yeah, Mama Max has entered the chat. They were told that, okay, this goes far, it goes way higher than you even think. There's far more to this than you think. And folks got it in their head around September, when was it? August in 2016, that one of the voices on the YouTube video was, it's all good, was John Podesta. Like, they got it in their head that, like, that it somehow John Podesta was attached to World Corp Enterprises. And actually, Skillsy, if you could find the Nexpo YouTube video on this and post it in the chat, that would be great. But yeah, basically that particular online conspiracy spawned Pizzagate, which then ballooned into what would become QAnon. So, yeah. When you tell people the origin stories of where these big narratives come from, thank you. You know, that, this is actually where it comes from. I mean, it's risky. Everything's risky. There's no guarantees here. There never are. But I've found that if you present them right, if you present them in ways that like affirm away from that kind of epistemic frame, that people tend to be like, oh, is that what it is? And then, or they'll just out of hand reject it because they have some, denial cord that they're holding on to, and they can't blow down their own house of cards. They can't lose face for some reason. And that's a separate problem. There you have to go through affect, go through relation, and kind of work out what that kind of thing might. Yeah, it's a lot like Scientology, actually. Yeah, very, very, very similar. That's a really good observation. And Scientology is even more insidious because in order to advance through the levels, much like the NXIVM cult, you have to give them blackmail material. You have to confess the deepest parts, of your psyche, of your background, etc., and then they tape it. And if you try to leave, well, hello, blackmail. So, yeah. Now, this is where the exploitation of relation within argument is insidious and needs to be looked at more. We can, when we talk about argumentative roles later, like Cat Stevens, not the musician, but the argument scholar, she talks about entrance options and exit options that aren't equal among social groups. I think that's a really important discussion. So, yeah. Any other questions or comments? Also gonna change our question music a bit. No, I'm keeping it on. I just had to change it up. Any other questions? Because otherwise I can just talk about whatever. I can explain some of the things, some of the terms I've used. this stuff. Thoughts on okay, I'm gonna level with people. One of the most annoying discursive spaces in general are fandom spaces. Like there are certain fandoms where I cannot stand them, and it's just a matter of a certain yeah exactly. There are certain ways of understanding media such that it goes past I enjoy this. It goes past I'm a fan of this. It becomes a kind of dogmatic commitment. Right? Nightmare Tumblr fan. Yeah, exactly. And this dogmatic commitment ends up as a community frame of knowledge. Hey, there's that our sort of arguing thing again. And that community frame of knowledge ends up selecting both for and against certain things. Now, am I saying that if you're a brown coat that I'm like, nope? No, I've known decent brown coats. But I want to say that much like with Harry Potter, much like with Doctor Who, much like with Sherlock, much like with Star Wars, much like with Star Trek, much like with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, much like with most of the modern media, there are fanish factions that are infuriating to deal with. So now, one of the things that I wish fanish factions would do, or wish people would do, is look at the political commitments and the political values that are involved with those factions. Like, there's a lot of brown coat ideology that ends up steering people to libertarianism, oddly. At least it did back in the day. You know, you won't take the sky from me, that whole thing. It's it presumes a particular political metaphysic of the individual, along with the plot of the show itself. It's a very, mercenary, individual, libertarian plot. Now, does that mean there can be no togetherness? Of course not. But it does mean that a lot of the brown coats that I've met who are not great, there's a lot of overlap that about some sort of questionable political commitments there regarding, community and what have you. Harry Potter has a similar problem. Star Wars definitely has a similar problem. Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily want to yuck. Like, if you enjoy Firefly, great. Like, if you're a brown coat, wonderful. I'm not gonna sit here and say, oh, you're a terrible person for liking Firefly. No, not at all. However, there's a community stuff here that I have very deep reservations about. And like, I say that as a philosopher, philosophy has a lot of deep community stuff that I have a lot of reservations about, because, oh my God, there are some people in this discipline who are trash fires. So, like, it's a matter of community gathering and community accountability that I just wish was more prevalent in Brown Coat and Harry Potter and Star Wars and Star Trek, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah. And I think making the distinction between being a fan of things and being in the fandom is an important one. Because being in the fandom, oh my God, philosophy fandom is so rough. It's so rough, y'all. It's bad. It's really, really bad. I don't know why the music stopped there. Okay. So, yeah. Star Wars leaned into which side are you marketing stuff. Oh, man. Thank you, Trent. Thank you, Trent. I appreciate it. Who's the Phil fan shipping? Well, it depends. Well, I appreciate it, Skillsy. I didn't have time to compose like 5 different songs for this. So I just kind of love this one. Who's the Phil fan shipping? Right now, I mean, it depends on the community. Like there are sub community. No. It depends on the community you're in. So like there's philosophy. I'm trying to figure out like a good way to sort of talk about like an analogy here. Like no other academic discipline. Yeah, I would actually say I would be so bold as to say that philosophy has a toxicity problem, considering that the culture within the APA, within even SPEP, especially towards anyone who doesn't necessarily fit within the particular frame of identity that is most often seen as credible, or uses the kinds of argumentative moves that are sanctioned or that are regarded as acceptable and not sanctioned. I would probably say that, you know, philosophy has a larger problem than, say, even CS. I mean, all you have to do is look at the saga of Kathleen Stock and Brian Leiter. These aren't isolated agents. They keep coming back. I mean, Kathleen Stock is sort of the newest version of Janice Raymond. And likewise, if we even look at the classics, say Heidegger or Levinas's weird thing with colonial life, or Kant or Hume. Like, these aren't perfect people, and we don't require people to be ideologically pure in order for them to be philosophically useful. But we should also be careful about the kind of secular fandoms, the kind of the ways in which philosophy becomes a secular spirit practice for fan fiction. Because there are many ways in which philosophy's defense of these sorts of figures and the way that people take offense when these figures are attacked ends up resembling the kind of fan fiction wars that we saw in the early aughts before AO3. Like, this is something that I'm pretty firm on, if only because I've seen it so much. There's quite a bit of problematic communication and problematic argumentation behavior that it's getting better. Like, I'm not going to say that, like, oh, it's still the bad old days from the 70s and 80s, for, you know, the old University of Michigan culture that Brian Leiter grew up in. But I do want to say that, you know, it's not fixed yet. And for examples of that, just go on philosophy Twitter. You know, because philosophy Twitter, especially with the deal around Krista Peterson, Nathan Osseroff Spicer, the rest of us Red Guard Twitterati. You know, it's pretty gnarly. So, not to mention like stuff like Colin McGinn. It was just gross. Colin McGinn, for those of you, He's a Phil Mind person who sexually harassed a whole bunch of people for a really long time, and he's just a giant scuzzbag. And his latest excuse is that he sexually harassed his grad students because they were in a genius program, and he was trying to make them better and give them a leg up. Pardon me while I barf in my trash can. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Colin McGinn. He's a goddamn trash fire. Like when philosophy goes trashy, it does not hold back. It goes the whole way. And I'm like, and the rest of us are like, what are you doing? What are you doing? No. Apparently. I mean, like I use that occasionally, Jess, but the only reason is just a linguistic shorthand. It has nothing to do with commitment, you know. But I could also see where it implies commitment. Like I often say, you know, as a joke, I'm a Duridian, but that's just because, you know, I like paraconsistent truth and I like playing with words, but that's about it. You know, if someone were to critique Derrida, I'd be like, yep, that's right. He was a womanizing son of a bitch. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to sit here and try to, you know, write apologia after apologia about him because he doesn't need to be saved. He's dead. He's fine. Not that I think about people that occasionally want to save dead people from harsh opinions. So there's like a couple of things here. What if you need to be saved? Trying to catch the context. I'm sorry. There's like 3 different context frames floating around, and I want to make sure I'm tracking the right one. Oh, okay. That's cool. You're all good. So I don't know, saved from what? It depends. I mean, if you need to be saved from an oncoming tractor, then I will absolutely. I will absolutely save you. If you need to be saved from something else, like QAnon or something like that, it's gonna. Yeah, I mean, you know, a ride can be a save, I suppose. Yeah. When you were a sophomore in college, your history teacher told you you were Machiavellian, Andre. What did he mean, and should I seek vengeance? Car Strandings. If I had an Andre impression, because that was like I could hear Andre's cadence in that. I don't know if I have an Andre impression though. Yeah. Car Strandings, the next game from Hideo Kojima. No, that's not it. I gotta work on my impression of the Gaming Fix crew. So anyway, to answer your question, Andre, Machiavellian, it probably was meant as a kind of pejorative thing. Which is to say, usually the connotation with Machiavellian for people who have only kind of read The Prince is that you're manipulative, you seize opportunity, and the best way that you can go through life is through finding ways to insert yourself so that way you can receive valor. There was a comment on a group project where we had to write about philosophers. I mean, the question itself could be seen as Machiavellian. Yeah. Machiavelli, though, he gets kind of a bad rap, to tell you the truth. I mean, like, yeah, you know, there's the whole seize every opportunity stuff. But really what he's trying to do is point out in political times like ours, how you can affect general change for the sake of justice and finally get us out of this mess. It involves getting your hands dirty. You kind of have to get your hands dirty. There is no innocence. None. None of us are innocent. And so when we're really take this seriously, it just depends on how you want to get your hands dirty and what future you want to bring by getting your hands dirty. Hashtag reclaim Machiavellianism. Yeah. So that's just one way to interpret it. I'm sure there are other people who would be really appalled by what I just said, but that's okay. All right. You got 4 minutes. So unless there are more pressing questions. How am I doing? I'm doing pretty good. This is a kind of chaotic introduction, but at the same time, I think there's probably a way to make it more streamlined. And this was very useful. I hope you're doing well, though. As far as next meeting, it's every Wednesday at 6 p.m. To generally 8 p.m. So a seminar length. Yeah. Each Wednesday, I'm going to be having this. I'm probably also going to be making some much more polished, scripted stuff. That kind of thing. So look for those on YouTube. I will post the YouTube link once I have it. Oh, a reading list. I didn't want to assume, because again, I'm like, we're going for like laymen. I didn't want to assume that. Oh, I'm glad. Thank you, Jess. I appreciate that. I was a little worried about it. But because I'm aiming towards like the folks who may not have time or the inclination to read a textbook, I didn't have a reading list. But if you would like one, I can put one up. I definitely have a bunch of stuff. So for now, don't worry about reading something for next. I mean, you never have to worry about reading something before you come into this stream. This idea is that it's supposed to be as accessible as possible, though the caption thing that I had didn't work, and I'm sad about it, so I'm going to figure it out. But as soon as I know, you will also know. And we've gotten on Cyberpunk. Yeah, you should play Pathologic 2. I'm gonna go with Scalesy here. Pathologic 2 is like a better thing. Yeah, I didn't hear that. I heard that they attached a notice. I didn't hear that they actually fixed it. That they solved the brain dance problem. Interesting. Oh yeah, that's the point. It's supposed to be very unforgiving. Oh, they did. I'm really happy to hear that. I'm very, very, very happy to hear that. Although they are burning goodwill left and right. Not that I'm going to talk about the good old games thing. I knew a couple of people who it wasn't. Pathologic 2? The narrative is as such where you it's not just the fact that you die. Your death has consequences and you cannot save everybody. It's basically just, I would recommend you play it, if only because I would say that it's like, what if Shelby, Julia, and myself all wrote a game? It's really cool. Liu, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. I'm glad you found it engaging. I hope you have a lovely evening. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your corrections. Thank you for your suggestions. I love them. And feel free to come on back.